Imagine a vegetable so fragile that it shatters if you look at it wrong, oozes sticky white sap like a wounded alien, and turns brown within minutes of being pulled from the earth. Sounds like a nightmare, right? Now imagine that same vegetable tasting like fresh oysters from the sea, even though it grew in your backyard garden 1,000 miles from any coastline. For 300 years, this root was considered essential to survival, prized by kings and peasants alike, featured in the most important household manual of the Victorian era, and planted by George Washington himself. And then, almost overnight, it vanished from our plates, our markets, and our collective memory. This is the story of salsify, the vegetable oyster, and the unlikely villain that erased it from history wasn't disease, climate change, or even bad taste. It was an appliance sitting in your kitchen right now. If you're fascinated by the foods we've forgotten and the secrets buried beneath our modern convenience, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe, because we're about to dig into something truly remarkable. So let's set the scene. The year is 1861, and every respectable Victorian household owns one essential book. Not the Bible, surprisingly, but Mrs. Beeton's Book of Household Management. This absolute doorstop of a tome ran over 1,100 pages and dictated everything from how to hire a footman to the proper way to make turtle soup. And tucked among all those elaborate instructions, Mrs. Beeton dedicated an entire entry to preparing one specific root vegetable. The instructions were meticulous, precise, almost reverent, because this wasn't just another ingredient. During Britain's brutal, seemingly endless winters, when fresh produce disappeared for months at a time and your only options were whatever you'd managed to store in the cellar, salsify delivered something almost magical. It gave you the taste of the ocean from a root you could dig out of frozen ground with your bare hands. The French, with their typical flair for naming things, called it the vegetable oyster. English working-class families who could never dream of affording actual oysters had their own name for it: poor man's oyster. Either way, this humble root bridged the gap between rich and poor, feeding everyone from aristocrats to farmers through the darkest months of the year. But here's where the story gets interesting. The Romans actually knew about salsify way back in 77 AD. Pliny the Elder documented it in his Natural History alongside every other useful crop in the empire's agricultural arsenal. But the Romans, practical as always, grew it for function rather than flavor. They completely missed what this plant could actually do. The real discovery happened over 1,000 years later in France and Italy during the 1500s, when someone finally prepared the root properly and tasted what they had created. That first bite must have been a revelation. The flavor wasn't fishy or overly briny, but it was unmistakably, almost impossibly reminiscent of shellfish in a way that no other vegetable on earth could match. Word spread fast. By the 1700s, salsify cultivation had expanded across Europe and jumped the Atlantic to the American colonies, where it found a new home in some very famous gardens. Think about this for a moment. George Washington's gardeners at Mount Vernon planted salsify right alongside the more familiar carrots and parsnips. New England farmers grew it as a winter staple, and colonial cookbooks featured recipes for salsify fritters that supposedly tasted exactly like fried oysters. And here's the real kicker. Salsify contains a prebiotic fiber called inulin that feeds the beneficial bacteria in your gut more effectively than almost any other plant food known to science. But wait, there's more. The root contains polyacetylene antioxidants, compounds with names like falcarinol and falcarindiol that multiple scientific studies have linked to anti-inflammatory effects and potential protection against colon cancer and acute lymphoblastic leukemia. Victorian physicians didn't have the equipment to measure any of this, but they recommended salsify for digestive complaints and liver problems anyway. Their observation taught them what science would eventually confirm. This root was doing something right inside the human body. So if salsify is this nutritious, this delicious, and grows during winter when you need food most desperately, why on earth aren't we eating it? Why have most of us never even heard of it? The answer is painfully simple. Salsify is an absolute nightmare to harvest, and our modern food system has zero patience for difficult vegetables. Let me paint you a picture of what Victorian farmers were dealing with. Peak salsify cultivation happened during the late 1800s when a commercial farmer named Peter Henderson published Gardening for Profit, essentially the farming Bible of the era. His assessment was brutally honest. Not many people eat it, but those who do will pay premium prices. For farmers willing to wrestle with this crop's endless peculiarities, salsify represented serious money. But those peculiarities were absolutely brutal. The plant demands 4 to 5 months of cool weather to mature properly, and if temperatures climb above 85 degrees during summer, the roots turn stringy and fibrous, basically worthless. You cannot transplant salsify seedlings because they develop a taproot immediately, and any disturbance to that root kills the entire plant. But the real torture is the soil preparation. Your garden bed must be loose and completely free of stones to at least 12 inches deep. Any rocks, any hard clumps of clay, any resistance whatsoever, and the roots fork, split, or grow stunted into unusable shapes. Farmers had to work their fields with nearly twice the care they would give to ordinary carrots. And then comes the harvest itself, which is where things go from difficult to nearly impossible. Salsify roots are extraordinarily fragile, almost comically so. The white skin is paper thin, and the flesh inside lacks the fibrous strength that makes carrots relatively easy to handle. When you dig a salsify root, you're not just pulling a vegetable out of the ground. You're performing surgical excavation. Loosen the soil around it carefully. Insert your digging fork at precisely the right angle. Lever gently, very gently, and hope the root comes up in one piece. Half the time, it snaps anyway. And when salsify breaks, disaster strikes immediately. The root starts oozing milky white latex, the same sticky sap that dandelions produce, coating your hands, your tools, everything around you. More importantly, the broken surface begins oxidizing within minutes, transforming from pristine white to ugly brown to unappetizing gray as enzymatic reactions destroy the delicate flavor. A broken salsify root loses its market value instantly. It spoils faster, tastes worse, and cannot be stored. Everything that made the root valuable disappears the moment the skin cracks. Commercial farmers tried everything to solve this problem. Specialized tools, soil amendments, gentler harvesting techniques, nothing worked. The fundamental issue remained. Salsify roots are anatomically fragile, and industrial agriculture demands crops that tolerate rough handling, period. The storage situation only made things worse. Even intact salsify roots require nearly perfect conditions to keep. 32 degrees Fahrenheit with 95 to 98% humidity. Too warm and they wither away to nothing, too dry and they shrivel into uselessness. Even under ideal conditions, salsify lasts only 2 to 4 months maximum. The Victorians actually had a clever solution to this problem. They simply left the roots in the ground all winter long. Salsify tolerates hard freezes beautifully. In fact, frost actually improves the flavor by converting starches into sugars, creating that sweet, nutty, oyster-like taste that made the vegetables so prized. A farmer could mulch the bed with straw, dig through winter as needed, and harvest fresh roots right up until spring. This system worked perfectly for centuries, right up until it became completely obsolete almost overnight. The refrigerator changed everything, and I mean everything. When home refrigeration became widespread in the 1920s and 1930s, the entire logic of winter vegetables shifted beneath our feet. For centuries, root crops like salsify existed precisely because they solved a critical storage problem. No refrigeration meant you desperately needed vegetables that could survive months in a dark cellar or stay frozen in the ground until you needed them. But refrigeration offered something revolutionary. Suddenly, any vegetable could be stored year-round. The robust, easy-to-harvest crops gained a massive advantage overnight. Potatoes could be shipped in bulk without damage. Carrots tolerated mechanical harvesting. Parsnips didn't shatter if someone handled them roughly. Salsify, meanwhile, still required skilled hand harvesting from careful workers, still broke during transport, still spoiled if damaged, still demanded near-freezing storage with extreme humidity. For commercial agriculture, the economics simply stopped making any sense at all. Why would a farmer invest twice the labor for a crop that might shatter before reaching market when potatoes existed? The final blow came from international trade. Refrigerated shipping meant fresh asparagus could arrive from South America in January. California artichokes appeared in New York markets year-round. The unique flavors that made salsify so special during those long Victorian winters became ordinary once global supply chains could deliver practically anything to your doorstep at any time. By the 1940s, salsify had essentially vanished from commercial cultivation entirely. Seed catalogs still offered it to nostalgic gardeners, but supermarket buyers had absolutely no interest in a crop that broke during transport and required specialized storage that nobody wanted to provide. Today, you will not find fresh salsify in 99% of grocery stores. Not because it tastes bad, not because people wouldn't enjoy it, but because our food system optimized for convenience over quality and efficiency over nutrition. Refrigeration didn't replace salsify. It enabled an entirely new food system that had no room for fragile, difficult, labor-intensive crops. The economics of mass-market agriculture tilted permanently toward vegetables that tolerated rough treatment, and anything requiring skilled hands and precise conditions couldn't compete against potatoes dumped into bins by the ton. But here's the thing that keeps nagging at me. The Victorians understood something we've completely forgotten. A vegetable didn't need to ship across continents. It needed to survive your local winter and keep your family fed when nothing else grew. Salsify excelled at that singular essential task. You could dig it from frozen ground in the darkest days of February and prepare a meal that tasted like the ocean despite being 500 miles from the nearest coast. That was enough, until suddenly it wasn't. The plant doesn't know it's obsolete, though. Salsify still grows wild in ditches and abandoned fields across Europe and North America, the descendants of Victorian plantings persisting stubbornly where no one tends them. If you want to grow salsify yourself, absolutely nothing stops you. The seeds germinate readily in cool weather. The plants tolerate frost and cold without complaint. The roots will survive all winter beneath a protective layer of mulch. Come spring, you can dig them fresh from the ground and prepare them exactly as Mrs. Beeton instructed over 160 years ago. We just decided we don't need that problem solved anymore because the refrigerator solved it for us, along with the global supply chain and the industrial system that prioritizes whether a vegetable can survive a truck ride over whether it can actually sustain you through a winter. Salsify was a vegetable that demanded effort and rewarded you with survival, with flavor, with nutrition that modern science is only beginning to understand. Our current agricultural system prefers vegetables that demand nothing from us and reward us only with convenience. The choice between these two approaches shaped which plants we remember and which ones we forget entirely. And salsify, the vegetable oyster that tasted like the sea and broke if you breathed on it wrong, simply disappeared from our consciousness. It's a reminder that sometimes the best things in life are the hardest to hold on to. And maybe, just maybe, in our headlong rush toward convenience, we lost something precious. The actual taste of the seasons themselves, the connection to what the earth provides when you're willing to work for it. So the question remains, and it's one only you can answer. Are you willing to do the work to taste it again? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I genuinely want to know if you've ever heard of salsify, ever tasted it, or if you're now curious enough to track down some seeds and try growing it yourself. And if these kinds of forgotten foods and lost agricultural wisdom fascinate you as much as they fascinate me, make sure you're subscribed with notifications turned on because the next vault opens soon. And trust me, you won't want to miss what we're uncovering next.